Hello, today I'd like to talk to you about what is a fat quarter. A fat quarter seems to be a cut of fabric that is peculiar to quilters. We like to buy fat quarters for some reason. It is talking about fabric, nothing else. And I'd like to just show you how we would cut a fat quarter in a shop. A fat quarter is a quarter of a yard of fabric in area, but it's not a straight cut that's a quarter of a yard wide. If I was going to cut just a quarter of a yard of fabric from a bolt, now a bolt, remember, is about approximately 44 inches wide, and usually they come folded over, so this is half the width of a bolt that you can see here. And if I was just cutting quarter of a yard, I would be cutting at 9 inches. A yard is 36 inches long, so a quarter of that is 9, so I'd cut off 9 inches. So this is a quarter of a yard. Opened out, you get a fairly long, fairly narrow strip of fabric. A fat quarter, as its name indicates, is a fatter shape. So instead of cutting just quarter of a yard, I'd open out my bolt and I'd cut off half a yard. So I'm going to cut at 18 inches, and I'm using my board for my measurements. So I cut 18 inches, which is now half a yard of fabric, which is twice as much as we want. So instead of having a long narrow strip, I'm going to cut that in half down the middle bit here. So I would just cut off a very, very thin slither of that, which then separates that into two pieces that are now 18 inches along the selvage, so they're 18 inches long, half the width of the fabric, so they're approximately 22 inches. But we would allow probably 21 inches if we're calculating, because fabrics do vary a little bit in their width. And then most shopkeepers will fold their fabrics into a shape or size that suits the shop decor that they're using. I fold mine up into a fairly small size, and then they're available for sale. Quite often they would come perhaps with a little sticker on them or a label or something from the particular shop, but this is a fat quarter. So the next question is, why do we need a fat quarter? Well, if we're wanting to make something with long strips, we don't want a fat quarter because we want a long skinny strip, so this might be a skinny quarter. But very often we're wanting to cut squares or other bigger shapes, but we only really need a quarter of a yard of fabric overall. And so we can achieve that by having a larger cut that way, but not so wide. So very often patterns in their requirements for the quilt will say that you need X number of fat quarters of particular colours and things. Well, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get something that size in your fat quarter. I have done a chart that indicates how much fabric you might use, how many squares and strips you can get from a regular fat quarter. So your fat quarter, remember, is probably about 22 inches wide by 18 inches down the selvage. So I've allowed it to be 21 inches wide in case the fabrics are slightly different in width, and maybe a usable amount of 17 inches along the selvage, because again you may have to square up your fabric. Sometimes they're just a little bit crooked. So I've just said here that you can get 17 1-inch strips, for instance, or you can get 3 5.5-inch strips, and then if you wanted to cut those into squares, it will tell you here how many squares that you can get out of those strips and things like that. So quite a useful chart, and that's available on my website, GourmetQuilter.com. And having talked about all that, fat quarters are a very, very useful thing. Quite often they're used as just gifts and things, as well as just the fabric amounts that you need for quilts and things. And they look so effective. Quite often they're done in a bundle. And here you can see how I display my fat quarters in my shop. Because I have this smaller sizing, I have had some shelves made that take the smaller shapes of fat quarters, and I just sit them all in there, and my customers can have a look at those and choose the colours that they're looking for. Thank you.